Hey everyone, I'm PostRobcore and welcome to Dev Journal 3. I'm making great progress on Fantasy Fencer. I unfortunately got sick while working on version 0.5, so I didn't post an update, and instead just kept moving on to 0.6. I'm actually working on 0.7 now, but this is a great point to stop and show what I've been up to. This week we'll cover the 0.5 combat update. I redid the combat system from tap combat to slashes. The prediction I had the game was veering to become more like Fruit Ninja was right, and it was a lot more fun. There's a lot of flexibility in what the enemies can do if the player needs to slash through incoming attacks instead of tapping on them. The enemies are more alive now. They move around, have regular and special attacks. Their attacks come in the form of bubbles that the player has to slash through to prevent damage. If the player gets hit, then they take damage, and they may get stats effects applied depending on the enemy's attack. I also added in a lot of extra stuff to combat, like elemental resistances, weaknesses, and even absorption and immunity. I also added stats effects for the player and enemies like poison, bleed, and stun. I kept the prepare screen. I'm a huge fan of that. I even expanded it a bit to let the player know more about the enemy they're fighting and what elemental resistances or status effects immunity that the enemy has. This did have the side effect of adding a lot of new items to the game, like stains and resistance potions for all the elements, as well as healing and recovery items. Players can choose to use items or throw them at the enemies. Be careful with that, because you can heal the enemy, or pick an elemental stain that the enemy will absorb. I mean, fire elementals love fire. Using items doesn't interrupt combat, but changing sabers or running away will prevent the player from attacking or defending. Look, the fencer actually runs away now. Fantasy Fencer uses an elemental system of normal, earth, fire, thunder, and water. Stains can add elemental damage boosts, or even apply weaknesses on hit. The Fencer's Guild will recommend throwing stains that apply debuffs. Fencers in the Fantasy Fencer world are trained in a fencing style called item left, saber right. They do not use shields and instead fence one-handed while keeping their offhand free to apply stains, drink potions, or throw bombs. Alright, cool. Let's do a little dev talk about how the combat system works. The goal of the system was to minimize how much of an enemy was unique in the game's code. I wanted to create a generic enemy class and reuse it as much as possible. Let's follow the journey of the giant crab on its way into the new combat system. First, we start off with the giant crab image used in the earlier versions of the game. It's a static image and can't do much more than move, rotate, resize, and recolor. So I broke the image apart and saved each piece into its own file. Cool. Now we have a crab with a body and 2 claws. Next is setting up the code. I like to load in content through data instead of hard coding into the game. So the general layout is this. Enemy data is loaded through JSON when the game starts. Enemy is the main model used in the game logic. Enemy glue controls the elements actually shown to the player. I usually write glue on the end of classes that will be displayed to the player and are responsible for setting textures and colors and handling input. I also do the same setup for enemy parts such as the claws and the crab. The only custom part I have for each enemy is here, where I need to put hitboxes around images that are not going to have the same silhouette. After that, I have lists of enemy attack modes. These contain data which enemy parts are active and have health bars, and the attacks and animations the enemy can use. This includes special attacks and attack mode transitions. For example, when the Shagwolf's health is low, it will turn around and use its tail to protect itself until the tail is defeated or the attack mode times out. Attack info contains which animation to play, how many incoming attack glues are needed, and if the attack can apply status effects like stun or burn. The enemy also has a temperament, which determines how fast they choose attacks. There's also a drop table so the player can get some loot when they win. All this gets bundled nicely into a combat model that tells the game what the player is fighting and where they should go when combat resolves. Later, I'll expand this to include info on setting up the backgrounds based on the environment the player is in. When combat starts, we're sent to the combat screen, which handles reading data about the combat, setting up the glues, and playing the combat start introduction. The combat system handles all this and sets up the enemy for the player. It's a lot of JSON and data to put together, and a lot of time in the Godot animation panel, but it all comes together pretty nicely. When it's set up, adding content is kind of just following a recipe. Adding more enemies is mostly picking the closest fit to what I want, adding new stuff as needed, and otherwise just adjusting art or attack patterns. Kinda cool. So what's next? Next time we'll talk about the version 0.6 updates to the town UI, the explore screen, and even talk about the story characters we'll meet in the world of Fantasy Fencer. I posted my Blue Sky account if you want micro updates between the dev journals. Thanks for watching. Please like, subscribe, let me know what you think in the comments, and check out my other stuff. Take care. See ya.